although I must say that in his concluding remarks, the Minister of Finance did open the debate. So I hope you'll give us some latitude, as we say. We won't go beyond certain limits, but I think we have the freedom to express ourselves in respect of specific amendments, and we have to be given the latitude to highlight what we want to convey. Let me comment on Bank of Mauritius Act, 3F. And the proposed amendment is in order, as official foreign reserves should be under the control of central bank and available for use in the event of need, for example, to support the rupee. Our monetary policy is to control inflation and keep interest rate relatively low. As such, any official foreign reserve invested in any corporation or company cannot be reckoned as part of official foreign reserves. And I expect there will be strict compliance to Section 3F. Now, this is largely due to the pressure being borne by the IMF, which made it clear that there is an adequate level of reserves, but if not built upon, the risk of a crisis is likely. Now, what was the level of foreign reserves 6 months ago? $7.4 billion in January 2020, and over a period of 5 months, loss foregone is $400 million. And if it were not for the special inflow from the African Bank Development, it would have been higher by another $200 million. At this rate, it looks like Mauritius will register a balance of payment deficit higher than the estimate of $1 billion announced by the minister in reply to my PNQ on the 15th of May this year. Now, the amendments to the Bank of Mauritius Act, Section 45(6), makes it clear that the transfer of $2 billion to the Mauritius Investment Corporation will no longer form part of official reserves. Should the country face a major capital outflow arising from global financial instability, our reserve situation may prove to be inadequate. Mauritius would be placed in a dangerous situation as regards external financing of its widening current account deficit, potentially leading to a financial crisis and a collapse of the rupee. Now, despite reassurances of government and Bank of Mauritius regarding adequacy of our reserve, there is a persistent shortage of foreign currency on the market, which is a source of growing concern for the business sector. There are worrying signs building up, which I would advise the Minister of Finance to take careful note of with appropriate actions. Section B2A, the proposed amendment suffers from the lack of transparency and parliamentary scrutiny that have characterized the setting up and operation of the Mauritius Investment Corporation. The Mauritius Investment Corporation will basically bail out the already broke large operators who have been moving dividends offshore for years and had a highly leveraged business model that is more debt than equity. Now, MCB, whose money is tied up to these operators, is worried about its credit rating. Let me look at the governance structure of the MIC. And the governance structure, as it stands, is a disaster. The team is yet to be set up, and we need to have people who can neutrally do financial, operational, and legal due diligence and make sure that money goes to companies which should be kept alive. We cannot stop people asking whether the two gentlemen, beyond representing the private sector and having obvious conflict of interest, have experience in private equity, let alone distress investing, which is very complicated. Now, what the Bank of Mauritius should have done is to transfer some money to government, which then brings equity into the Mauritius Investment Corporation. The Mauritius Investment Corporation would have nothing to do with the Bank of Mauritius and would not be a subsidiary. The SPV could equally borrow money from the Bank of Mauritius. The special purpose vehicle would have a different parent than the Bank of Mauritius. Government of Mauritius and the Bank of Mauritius could be investors, and entity would be there to achieve a certain objective. Bank of Mauritius and government would then appoint a manager with expertise in this field, and Bank of Mauritius and government would establish clear guidelines and long-term investment objectives, and they would be passive investors, but the SPV manager would be accountable. Bank of Mauritius would be free from conflict of interest, as manager would execute based on overall guidelines. My advice is to our friends from the Mauritius Investment Corporation is to err on the principle of caution. And I also have to draw their attention and ask them to beware of those running new corporate finances which will ask for high brokerage and success fee, and I've been told that it can be as high as 5% or more. I hear corporate financiers are mushrooming, and it's democracy all the way. It's another gate in the making, and this one will probably be an iron gate. The manager needs to play very strong hardball on the big corporates. They should also bring money back from abroad as a condition for recapitalization. And the extent to which banks are squeezed initially to buy the debt at low market value will be a key drive of returns. Now, if they mess up, it will be a disaster, of course. It's time for government to give due consideration and to come with a fraud bill. Bank of Mauritius, as we said, and we've stated it more than once, should under no circumstances be another DBM. What respect would a regulatory and supervisory body command if it has a subsidiary bank, that is the Mauritius Investment Corporation, which is a losing concern and a lender of toxic loans? Let me now come to the amendment to the Pharmacy Act, Section 2. The amended definition of specified standards by deleting the words "or European" and replacing them by the words European or Indian is a boon for importers like High Performer, which of course purchase drugs from wholesalers not regulated. As of now, despite some of the criticism level, there's been no rebuttal from High Performer, but because we don't know what its traceability is. And what this amendment does, it opens the doors for imports of substandard drugs with no quality assurance. It's cheap drugs with high incidence of side effects. Mr. Speaker, only a reckless minister on the verge of vandalism will deliberately fall into the trap of importers who will market the drugs with a World Health Organization good manufacturing practices or certificate of analysis. First, anybody can issue a World Health Organization GMP certificate or certificate of analysis. That is, those manufacturing plants which produce low-efficacy drugs do indeed issue the certificate of analysis and the GMP of the World Health Organization. But what we need to do, and we need to import drugs from manufacturing plants which manufacture drugs under licenses. They can manufacture drugs under licenses and bear the name of Sanofi or Glaxo. And there is an established list of these EU and FDA pharmaceutical companies in India which produce quality drugs, and Mauritius should procure from them. We were safe, but we used to do so. We were safe, and we revised procurement protocol facilities to buy substandard drugs of Indian pharmacopoeia. Drug-induced disorders will increase and will be an unnecessary financial burden upon the state. I will invite the minister not to dispense favor, but to go for good quality medicine at no additional cost. Now, we also have to beware of the sale of counterfeit drugs under the specified item of Indian pharmacopoeia. I call upon the minister to reinstate the previous procurement protocol, which would enable Mauritius to buy quality drugs from any of the 300 Indian companies which also supply US and EU, that is accredited by regulatory authorities from Europe and the US Food and Drug Agency. Let me now turn to the Medical Council Act and comment on Section 22(1) and 2. First, let us consider the existing system, and I expect the minister to take corrective measures. One, in respect of registration problems faced by young graduates from French universities. Two, the outstanding issue of the pre-registration of a batch of 170 young qualified doctors who are waiting to start their internship. I'm glad that the entrance exam has been abolished. Of course, there'll be an exit exam. But what these doctors want to know is when will they be recruited to start their internship. Now, the Council Act requires that internship done after graduating does not cater for the French system. And I know this is an outstanding issue and has to be resolved. It was the subject of a PNQ by the then leader of opposition, Honorable Duval. The then Minister of Health promised to impress upon Medical Council to resolve the matter. I suppose the then chairman was too busy consolidating his links with potential gold diggers, the reason as to which the matter is yet to be resolved. Now let me come to clause 41 in section 22(2). For the minister arrogates himself unfettered powers to approve an examining body of international repute after consultation with council. Now, I doubt it if there would be consultation, because a bad example has been set by the Prime Minister. Consultation is narrowed to the dispatch of a letter to inform. I would invite the Minister to give due consideration to work with institutions of repute, of the likes of Imperial College of London, which has concluded a memorandum of understanding with Open University to run postgraduate course in public health. It is indeed important to pair up with the best. Mr. Speaker, I now want to address two issues which, on the face of amendments proposed, appear to go in the right direction, but which, however, contain the germs of abuse which are so characteristic of this government. I'm here referring to the proposed amendment to the Companies Act with the introduction of the definition of independent director in Section 2 of the Act and the addition of a new obligation to the duties of directors in Section 143 of the Act. Now, it would be appropriate to note that the Honourable Minister did not mention these amendments as part of a list of measures intended to bring more transparency and governance in our country. No, he wouldn't do so, as I expected, and we need to look at the Saint-Louis scandal, which brought about the pseudo-revocation of the former Deputy Prime Minister, and the emergency procurement scam of the Ministry of Health and Wellness regarding the allocation of tenders for drugs and medical equipment during COVID-19 confinement period, to know that opacity, copinage, conflict of interest, and abuse of power is what governs the action of this government. Of course, the role of the STC, which has been flush with foreign currency from Bank of Mauritius, has to be defined. And I will not come back to the massive payment of more than 500 million rupees effected to a dubious EU company whose credentials have been circulated. The EU, of course, is monitoring irrespective of indifference of the government. But let me come back to those two amendments, to Section 2 and 143 of the Companies Act, which do not owe their existence to a proactive cleanup act of this government. What do we find in the annex to the budget speech at page 23? That the proposed amendments are part of a series of measures implemented to improve the country's ranking in the World Bank Ease of Doing Business Index. In fact, it is a government of make-believe. Its concern is what appears in the Ease of Doing Business Index of the World Bank. It doesn't seem to be concerned at all with reducing the ease of doing corrupt business, where if you look at the Saint-Louis scandal and the emergency procurement of the medical equipment, the Ministry of Public Utilities and the Ministry of Health seem to be fighting for the first place, followed closely by the Ministry of Commerce. And even as regards the World Bank Ease of Doing Business Index, I will show to this House that although the proposed amendments to the Companies Act, with the introduction of the definition of independent director in Section 2 of the Act, and the addition of the new obligation to the duties of directors in Section 143 of the Act, appear to go in the right direction. They certainly contain the germs of abuse, which are so characteristic of this government. It is indeed my postulation that free of the constituent elements of the definition of an independent director, as proposed in clause 10A2 at page 20 and 21 of the bill, contains the germs of abuse and show this government lack of determination to address the issue in the face, for example, of the disastrous placing of Mauritius on the blacklist of the European Union. Now, what do I mean when I say that free of the constituent elements of the definition of independent director, as proposed in clause 10.2 of the bill, contain the germs of abuse? I mean that when one looks closely at the proposed criteria to be fulfilled to be an independent director in clauses 10A to B, E, and F, one can find the clear potential for abuse. In other words, when one looks closely at the element of material business relationship in clause B, at the element of close family ties in clause E, and that the element of significant link with other directors for involvement in other companies, organizations in clause F, one can clearly observe the potential for abuse, which is unfortunately one of the hallmarks of this government. In fact, the gist of the potential for abuse is that government seems to be taking a stance whereby, as long as Section 2, independent directors are not grossly or significantly not independent, it is all right with this government. In other words, it is okay with this government if Section 2, independent directors are to some extent not independent. Let us now look in particular at clause 10A to E, whereby an independent director must not have close family ties with any of the advisors, the senior employees, or directors of the company. The clause has the potential of being grossly ineffective because it does not define what the expression close family ties means, which in fact, knowingly or unknowingly, consciously or innocently, it does not. Indeed, what we learn is that you cannot be an independent director if you have close family ties with any of the advisors, directors, or senior employees of the company. First, it is now clear that the Honourable Minister has not defined what close family ties means for the purpose of ensuring that one is or is not an independent director. When we know of these scandals which have been afflicting the country since the government took over, can we believe that the failure by the Honourable Minister to define what close family ties are has happened unknowingly or innocently? Honourable Minister, please don't be part of the government's conspiracy to defraud and provide us, and I would impress upon the Minister to provide us urgently with a definition of what close family ties means. Now let me come to another point. When you look at clause 10A 2E at page 21 of the bill regarding close family ties, by implication, if an independent director must not have close family ties with any of the advisors, directors, or senior employees of the company, this prohibition regarding close family ties, however, means that for the purposes of Section 2 of the Companies Act, you can also be an independent director, even if you have other family ties other than close family ties with any of the advisors, directors, or senior employees of the company. Surely that contains the germ of abuse. Indeed, reason presupposes that if you have close family ties, you are grossly not independent. But it remains the case that if you have other family ties, you cannot be independent. You may not be grossly independent, but you are still not independent. Therefore, I strongly ask the Honourable Minister to review the component E of this WARP definition of independent director. In the same vein, as for the germs of abuse arising in the company, in the components of business relationship and family ties, things get worse in the component of F of what clearly appears to be the Honourable Minister's WARP definition of an independent director. Indeed, to be an independent director, the bill states at page 21 that the director must inter alia not have, I quote, significant links with other directors through involvement in other companies or other organizations. It is my contention, and I will prove it before the House and to the country, that there are 4 disgraceful deficiencies in this particular component of the definition of independent director. And the 4 disgraceful deficiencies in this particular component F of the definition of independent director at page 21 of the bill are to be found firstly in the requirement of significant link with other directors, and thirdly through involvement in other companies or other organizations. Regarding the first disgraceful deficiency, it is unacceptable that the legislator should propose that under component E, there should be no close family ties with advisors, directors, or senior employees of a company, but that under component F, there can be significant link with advisors and senior employees of the company, although not with directors. Even if one assumes that a director is independent, will there not be a perception that a director is not independent if he is allowed to have significant links with advisors or senior employees? In fact, it is a reasonable inference that allowing so-called independent directors to have significant links with advisors and senior employees of a company contains the germ of abuse. Another deficiency regarding this first element of component F of the definition of independent director is that the independent advisor can have link other than a significant link with, the independent director can have any link other than a significant link with other directors of the company, and this will clearly be acceptable in law, henceforth to qualify as independent director. Yet the perception is that one will possibly not be independent when one has a link with advisors, senior employees, and other directors, and if this government wants to clean up its act, it should rather insist that there must not be any link between independent directors, advisors, senior employees, or other directors, the key to all this being to give a legal definition to the term link. What is significant? Link for the purposes of an adequate definition of an independent director is surely a material element to establish the right criteria to be independent director. Yet the term significant is not legally defined in the bill and remains blurred. It should be given a definition and cannot be left to ordinary lexical definition, as would otherwise be the case if the term is left without legal definition. The Honourable Minister of Finance should not leave this unattended if he expects to be taken seriously. Mr. Speaker, I would postulate that what I've said about material business relationship, close family ties, and significant link in the definition of an independent director confirms the view that government is more in the realm of make-believe for the purpose of the ease of doing business index, not in the realm of good corporate governance and transparency. Let me now come to the addition of a new obligation to the duties of directors in Section 143 of the Act, which is also deficient in as much as the use of the word unfairly appears to be unnecessary. Under the newly proposed Section 143 subsection N, a director must at all times, in a manner which is not oppressive, unfairly discriminatory, unfairly prejudicial to shareholders. I cannot think of a single situation where one could be unfairly discriminatory to shareholders. I'm also of the view that that discrimination is by definition unfair, and that the drafting here has been badly, if I must say so. Similarly, from my perspective, prejudice is by definition unfair, so I cannot see the appropriateness of a duty not to be unfairly prejudicial to shareholders. The duty to be imposed under Section 143 subsection N is that a director must at all times act in a manner which is not oppressive, discriminatory, or prejudicial to shareholders. The word unfairly must be deleted from Section 143N. The need to define the term independent director and to increase the duties of directors under Clause 10C and 10D at page 21 of the bill, however, expose a blatant lacuna which has come to light recently with the Saint-Louis scandal. The Finance Bill should come up with provision to govern board members of institutions like CB, and should also have introduced independent directors for parastatal organizations. I would like to stress upon the urgent need for the Finance Bill to provide for duties to be imposed on board members to act in good faith and in the best interests of organizations which those boards oversee. Let me go back to the board of the CB to highlight the lacunae which urgently need to be plugged. We have been told that just like the Honourable Prime Minister, the former Deputy Prime Minister, did not apparently know about the investigation into fraudulent and corrupt practices in the Saint-Louis scandal until the 8th of June 2020. Yet, is it not true to say that among the board members were the former chairman of the board, the former acting general manager, the representative of the Ministry of Public Utilities, the representative of the CWA, the former senior advisor who chaired the board meeting on the 31st of October 2019, where it is now known officially that the fraudulent and corrupt practice of the Saint-Louis Gate scandal were raised. Surely, the House realizes that all these 5 board members were answerable to the former Deputy Prime Minister himself. How realistic is it that not one of them would have informed the then Deputy Prime Minister of the investigation into the fraudulent and corrupt practices that he allegedly came to know about only on the 8th of June 2020? In law, It is the former Deputy Prime Minister who should have revoked the board members. Did the former Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister, or the Honourable Prime Minister, for that matter, bother to find out before revoking those board members, which is why that they would have been informed, that they would have not informed the then Deputy Prime Minister of an investigation into fraudulent and corrupt practices when they came to know about the same officially, at least as far back as 31st October 2019. They have to give it in writing. Up to this day, the country does not know just why these 5 board members did not inform the Deputy Prime Minister, why they did not inform him. If the former Deputy Prime Minister, Honourable Prime Minister for that matter, did not bother to find out before revoking those board members, why is it that they would not have informed the then Deputy Prime Minister of the investigation into fraudulent and corrupt practices in 2019? The country still does not know whether neither the former Deputy Prime Minister nor the Honourable Prime Minister did not find out before revoking them. Worse still, if they had found out, why is the country still left in darkness? Had there been another cover-up? It is so convenient that the board members are gone without a special board meeting where they could all have been questioned. And this is where the finance bill is deficient. As opposed to dealing only with the definition of independent director and imposing one additional duty on directors under the new section 143N of the Companies Act, the bill should have come up with duties akin to that of company directors for board members of organizations like the Central Electricity Board and the State Trading Corporation. Thus, there would be statutory duty on board members to exercise the powers honestly, in good faith, and in the best interests of the organization they oversee, just like under Section 143C of the Companies Act for companies director. Similarly, there should be a duty to exercise care, diligence, and skill on board members of organizations like CEB, just like under Section 143D of the Companies Act for company directors. Let us look at this glaring omission of the finance bill, this time from the perspective of the responsibility of the Honourable Prime Minister, who was at the time also Minister of Finance, and now Honourable Prime Minister and Honourable Prime Minister then also, and now Honourable Prime Minister had 2 representatives on the board of CEB. During the time that the investigation on fraudulent and corrupt practices was known by the then acting general manager of CEB and the former chairman, and this since at least the first half of February 2019. In this respect, it is apposite to mention that according to law, one represented the Ministry of Finance and the other the Ministry of Economic Planning and Development on the board of CEB. Who were the 2 representatives of the then Minister of Finance and Honourable Prime Minister on the board of CEB from February 2019 to 30th June 2020? We still don't know to this day. How realistic it is that not one of them would have informed the Prime Minister or the Prime Minister's office or the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development on the investigation into fraudulent and corrupt practices in the Saint-Louis scandal. Has the Honourable Prime Minister bothered to find out why his representative did not inform him, or the PMO, of the investigation, especially when the corrupt practices, the country has been told, in breach of confidentiality, involve hundreds of millions of rupees of bribe? I'm sure that this House, the country and the whole nation will endorse an amendment to the Finance Bill where the Honourable Minister of Finance to impose a statutory duty on board members of organizations like CEB-STC to exercise the powers honestly, in good faith, and in the best interests of the organization they oversee, just as is the case under Section 143C of the Companies Act for company directors. Similarly, the whole country would appreciate if the Honorable Minister of Finance has the guts to impose a duty to exercise care, diligence, and skill on board members of organizations like the CEB, just as is the case under Section 143D of Companies Act for companies director. But will the Honorable Minister do that? Time will tell, and I don't think so. Unfortunately, my doubts are there. And this government, I believe, will prefer to have the Kanoria, the Prakash Mantura, and Zubair Jumail, and Siti's Naidu win the day, even if the whole nation can see that the country is going to the dogs barely 8 months after the coming into office. Thank you very much.